What if I told you that while Jimmy Page was crafting some of rock's most legendary riffs, music fellow guitarists were scheming behind the curtain, driven by nothing but envy? What if I told you that's right? While the Led Zeppelin mastermind was reinventing guitar playing and building a musical empire, some of rock's biggest names were quietly simmering with resentment. Obviously, in the past, the numbers that we'd worked right from the beginning. You know, the initial creation of from blues legends who watched their techniques get commercialized by a young upstart to prog rock pioneers who saw their intricate compositions eclipsed by Page's stadium-filling anthems. And try and work out these solos note for note, and that's it. Everyone learned that way. As for today, we're uncovering the bitter feuds, backstage flare-ups, and career-long grudges that exploded when musicians realized they'd been outmaneuvered by the wizard himself. We've got stolen riff accusations, publishing disputes, barbed interviews, and industry veterans revealing which guitar heroes truly despised Page's meteoric rise. Some of these rivalries sparked legal battles that dragged on for decades, while others festered in silence until they erupted in public. Get ready to meet the 6 musicians who were absolutely consumed with jealousy over Jimmy Page's dominance. The final revelation will leave you speechless about rock history's most guarded secrets. Jeff Beck possessed a level of technique that could make other players weep with envy. Applause. His innovative touch and fearless experimentation should have made him a household name. Dear friend of mine, Jeff, and you know Jeff and we go back to really early teens. Instead, he watched his former Yardbirds bandmate, Jimmy Page, become rock royalty, while Beck remained the musician's musician. According to multiple accounts, that imbalance gnawed at Beck for decades. The resentment reportedly began during their Yardbirds stint, when Beck noticed Page drawing more attention despite joining later. Former Yardbirds drummer Jim McCarty recalls Beck's snide asides about Page's showmanship overshadowing pure musicality. What stung even more was the commercial gulf. While Beck pushed into jazz fusion and avant-rock, Page packed arenas with riffs as simple as they were devastatingly effective. Critic Charles Shaar Murray wrote that Beck once grumbled about crowds valuing theatrics over true innovation. It showed in interviews, too. Beck took elegant little jabs at guitarists who put spectacle ahead of substance. Former Beck roadie Martin Stone has said Beck tracked Led Zeppelin's sales, comparing them obsessively with his own modest numbers. And when Guitar World splashed Page across its covers, photographers recall Beck flipping past those features with visible disgust. Session great Nicky Hopkins allegedly overheard Beck saying real guitarists were being ignored, while rock stars scooped up the accolades. For chord moves any competent player could execute with ease, Ritchie Blackmore spent years fusing classical vocabulary with hard rock, pioneering techniques that shaped generations. Then Jimmy Page arrived with mystical imagery and folk colors, and somehow became the definitive rock guitarist, while Blackmore's sophistication was often underappreciated. Similar area, and like I said, with Jimmy Page, he was in the same village. It's like a village, really. Insiders insist that gap in recognition infuriated the Deep Purple legend. The strain reportedly started when Led Zeppelin outsold Deep Purple, despite Blackmore's formal grounding. Keyboardist John Lord said, Blackmore would rant about Page's lack of formal training, yet greater fame, achieved through sheer marketing. What really rankled was the critical love affair. While Blackmore's Baroque-leaning pieces could be dismissed as pretentious, Page's equally intricate arrangements were hailed as revolutionary. Journalist Jeff Barton remembered a 1973 press conference where Blackmore fired pointed shots at players who relied on volume over virtuosity. Competition for the same audiences lit the fuse further. Former Rainbow manager Bruce Payne alleges Blackmore became fixated on outdoing Zeppelin's stage productions, spending fortunes on medieval flourishes that never drew equivalent press. And those guitar hero coronations? Multiple sources say Blackmore bristled at being passed over by guitar magazines in favor of Page's more photogenic mystique. Producer Martin Birch reportedly overheard him lament that serious musicians were losing ground to performers who understood image better than theory and compositional craft. Eric Clapton was hailed as God by devotees, revered for his deeply felt blues phrasing. But while Clapton honed traditional forms with reverence, Jimmy Page repackaged those same roots inside heavy rock and somehow surpassed the master in fame. He is the most unique guitar player and probably the most devoted. According to close circles, the feeling of betrayal cut deep. The friction allegedly started when Page began threading blues language. Clapton had spent years studying into Led Zeppelin's Thunder. Ginger Baker claimed Clapton felt Page commercialized sacred traditions without proper respect for the originators. The speed of Page's ascent hurt, too. Clapton had built credibility through long apprenticeship with the blues. Page seemed to gain instant stature by being louder and flashier. Music executive Robert Stigwood remembered Clapton complaining that substance was being sacrificed for showmanship. By the early 70s, the guitar hero debates put salt in the wound. Critics volleyed Page against others, while Clapton's name appeared less often, despite his obvious mastery. Derek and the Dominoes bassist Carl Rattle reportedly heard Clapton say that real blues was being crowded out by circus acts. And when Stairway to Heaven conquered the world, insiders say Clapton was genuinely frustrated to see a song built on basic blues moves crown the ultimate rock anthem, while his most faithful interpretations drew less acclaim. Stigwood said Clapton spent months dissecting why audiences preferred Page's drama over unvarnished emotion. Tony Iommi literally forged heavy metal guitar after losing his fingertips in a factory accident. He developed techniques that underpinned an entire genre. Yet as Iommi birthed something truly new, Jimmy Page was credited as the pioneer of heavy rock, despite building on existing foundations. And I said to Bill, forget that, I said, we don't want to go there. I said, as far as I know, he can't sing. Veterans say this misattribution drove the Black Sabbath architect to distraction. The frustration reportedly began when critics praised Led Zeppelin for inventing heaviness, while dismissing Sabbath as a novelty. Bassist Geezer Butler has said Iommi clipped articles celebrating Page's heavy tone, while Sabbath's earlier, more extreme contributions were shrugged off, technique credit graded as well. Despite reshaping guitar playing through physical adversity, Iommi watched Page receive louder applause for comparatively standard techniques polished by superiors. Production, journalist Lester Bangs recalled Iommi in 1971, making caustic remarks about careers built on marketing rather than innovation. The arms race for heaviest intensified it. Former Sabbath manager Patrick Meehan alleges Iommi became obsessed with proving his work more groundbreaking than Page's, pushing for heavier recordings that labels resisted. And those tone accolades for Page, multiple sources say Iommi quietly seethed seeing Page celebrated for sounds Iommi had pioneered years earlier with far less recognition. Producer Roger Bain reportedly heard Iommi sigh that true innovators were being forgotten while copyists collected the medals and the history books. Keith Richards built his legend on the most unforgettable riffs in rock, laying the backbone of countless Rolling Stones classics. Then, Jimmy Page started drawing praise as the premier riff writer, encroaching on Richards's turf, while his own contributions were eclipsed. According to band insiders, this trespass infuriated Richards. Jimmy, had you been doing some stuff with the Stones? Yeah. Tell us about it. Well, when I was in New York at the end of the tour, the jealousy allegedly kicked in when critics began comparing Page's riffs to Richards, often favoring Page's more elaborate constructions. Producer Jimmy Miller says Richards would pore over Page's ideas, hunting for weaknesses while grudgingly acknowledging their punch. What really grated was the technical praise. Richards's parts were sometimes waved off as simple but catchy, while Page's equally straightforward moves were analyzed like conservatory pieces. Journalist Nick Kent remembered Richards in 1974, tossing barbed quips about guitarists who collected unearned intellectual credit. The rivalry turned personal, as both chased the same session aces and producers. Former Stones manager Alan Klein alleges Richards avoided anyone tied to Led Zeppelin, fearing cross-pollination of ideas. And the publishing money? Multiple sources say Richards bristled at Page's songwriting royalties, feeling his own, equally crucial riffs generated less income. Former Stones assistant Joe Bergman is said to have heard Richards complain that true riff masters were being financially overshadowed by pretenders who knew business better than music. Jimi Hendrix reinvented the electric guitar, conjuring sounds no one thought possible, and earning the title of ultimate innovator. Yet those closest to him say Hendrix grew increasingly obsessed with Jimmy Page's soaring fame. Watching Led Zeppelin's ascent with mounting paranoia and resentment that may have fed his tragic downward spiral. Noel Redding, the experienced bassist, claimed Hendrix collected every Zeppelin album and played them repeatedly, dissecting Page's tricks, while muttering that inferior players were getting superior recognition. The jealousy reportedly intensified as critics began to compare the two, sometimes suggesting Page's structured approach was aging better than Hendrix's raw, explosive experimentation. What unsettled Hendrix most was the commercial arc. As his own sales dipped and performances grew erratic, Led Zeppelin rocketed upward with a tighter, more disciplined take on psychedelic power. Music executive Alan Douglas remembered Hendrix in 1970, lamenting that audiences were abandoning true innovation for safer alternatives. The fixation turned corrosive when Hendrix began weaving Page-influenced touches into his playing, drifting from his singular voice toward more conventional choices. Drummer Mitch Mitchell allegedly told friends that Hendrix was losing his musical identity by chasing someone else's success. 6 legendary guitarists consumed by jealousy over Jimmy Page's incredible success. From blues masters to metal pioneers, even the greats struggled with Page's dominance. Which rivalry surprised you most? Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more rock secrets, and ring that notification bell.